Should the Detroit Lions re-sign Carlton Davis? That is the biggest question that the Lions have to answer going into this offseason. On top of hiring coaches, potential cuts, roster moves, draft picks, what they're going to do in April, all of that pales in comparison to the question of whether or not Carlton Davis will be on the roster come 2025. And today, we're going to answer that question. We're going to go over the pros and the cons of re-signing Carlton Davis, what he brings to the roster, what the Lions would lose if they let him walk out the door, and whether or not the new contract would be worth it to bring 23 back for another couple of seasons. So, with that being said, let's take a look at Carlton Davis, whose Detroit Lions career has been fairly short-lived and yet relatively impactful. Carlton Davis was traded from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just this past offseason, and in exchange for a third-round selection in this past draft, the Detroit Lions got Carlton Davis, a 2024 sixth-round pick, and a 2025 sixth-round pick. They were the winners of that trade, I would say. The third round pick is not a position where you would get a player of Carlton Davis's value. And with one of their sixth round picks, they ended up drafting Christian Mahogany, who will likely be a starter in all likelihoods next season, either at right guard or at left. Carlton Davis has been really good for the Detroit Lions. Even in just 13 games, Davis was phenomenal. He had 56 tackles on the season, 2 tackles for loss, 11 passes defended, a forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 interceptions. And looking at some of his more advanced statistics, he allowed a 55.3% completion percentage, 567 yards through the air, and 2 touchdowns while being targeted just 76 times. Now, was Carlton Davis the best cornerback in football? No. Was Carlton Davis a top 5, top 10 cornerback in football? Probably not. But when you consider the fact that last season, Cam Sutton, the Detroit Lions cornerback one at the time, gave up over 1,000 scrimmage yards and 6 touchdowns through the year with 1 interception that came off of a tipped pass, it was a big upgrade, right? It was a massive upgrade for the Detroit Lions, and their ability to get off the field on defense, their ability to take the football away as a defense was massively improved by the addition of Carlton Davis. Now, there are some downsides to Davis's play, right? Being a big physical press man corner is exactly what the Detroit Lions wanted, but it comes with a few drawbacks, mostly being the penalty situation, right? Carlton Davis was a heavily penalized cornerback. 5 DPIs, 2 holdings, and an illegal contact all by week 6. But the good news is after week 6, Carlton Davis wasn't called for a penalty for the rest of his season. And again, that's 13 games. That's over 7 games in a row with 0 penalties called against him. Just really good football, taking the football away, shutting down players on one side of the field, and giving the Detroit Lions the opportunity to win the game week in and week out. After Carlton Davis left the season against the Buffalo Bills, right, the secondary got worse. And every time Carlton Davis wasn't with the secondary, you could tell that they weren't the same. You could tell that they were less physical, they were less aggressive, they weren't able to do the things in the secondary that they were able to do earlier in the season. Down the stretch against San Francisco, against Minnesota, against, even Chicago, they struggled in the secondary. Terrion Arnold struggled. Amik Robertson at times struggled, right? Kendall Vildor struggled at times, and that was a massive issue for the Detroit Lions. They weren't able to get off the field as often. They weren't able to take the football away as often. And I think it's as easy to look at the turnovers, right? In the first 6-7 weeks of the season when Carlton Davis was playing at a really high level, the Detroit Lions were taking the football away 2, 3, 4 times a game. And then down the stretch, after losing Carlton Davis, they very rarely had an interception. Kirby Joseph had 2 against San Francisco, but Brian Branch didn't come away with an interception in the latter half of the season. Terrion Arnold had 0 interceptions in the season. Amik Robertson didn't come away with a pick. Like, the secondary statistically got worse when Carlton Davis was out, and it massively impacted the group as a whole, as well as the defense. One of the biggest injuries on the year was Carlton Davis, right? It was Aiden Hutchinson, then it was Aleem McNeil, and I would say third most impactful injury was Carlton Davis not being available in the secondary. Now, there are a lot of pros to keeping Carlton Davis as a cornerback one. The first of which is he's a big cornerback. He's a physical press man cornerback, plays a physical style of football. He's a strong tackler. He's a leader on defense. He's a culture fit. He's a scheme fit. He loves the defense, and the defense loves having him around. And as I just mentioned, the defense is better with Carlton Davis on the field. I don't think the Lions are going to find a better scheme or schematical fit for this defense than what Carlton Davis brings. I think the close second would be Charvarius Ward from San Francisco, but you can't bank on the fact that he's going to not return to San Francisco. You can't bank on the fact that he's going to even reach the open market because he's a really good player. San Francisco wants to keep him around. They paid him big money one time. I'm not going to be surprised if they pay him big money a second time. Carlton Davis is the best cornerback on the market. He is the best option that the Detroit Lions are going to have. He's the most talented. He's the best scheme fit. He's already been here. He's a great culture fit. He adds an attitude and a physicality to the secondary that they simply lack without him. Do I think Terrion Arnold could up his game and bring that physicality? Yes. Do I think Ennis Rakestraw could bring that type of physicality? Absolutely. Do I think Amik Robertson brings some physicality? Yes. But Carlton Davis brings it at a completely different level to what those three guys are able to do. And that's part of the reason why he doesn't play 17 games. It's because he plays physical, he plays tough, he gets a lot of wear and tear on his body, and it breaks down after some time. But with a couple of weeks off, knowing that Carlton Davis is going to play 13, 14 games a season, those 13 to 14 games, you're going to have a really good chance to win, especially through the pass game on defense, right? You know your defense isn't going to allow a lot of yards. You know they're not going to allow a lot of touchdowns with Carlton Davis covering that player because he's just really good. He shuts down wide receiver ones and was a great mentor and a great CB1 opposite of Terrion Arnold as he learns and develops going forward. Now, it's not a perfect pairing, right? There are cons and there are drawbacks to signing Terrion Arnold or to signing Carlton Davis, And some of those are really big cons, right? The injury history is a big one. You know, signing Carlton Davis, he's only going to play 13 games a season. He's not going to play all 17. He's going to miss about a month of time. And are you okay living with that? Are you okay? And do you feel confident in your depth knowing that, hey, Carlton Davis is going to probably miss a month of football. He's going to miss 3-4 games a season. Do you think Terrion Arnold and Amik Robertson and Ennis Rakestraw and maybe a rookie or another free agent for depth is going to be able to pick that up? Do you think Kendall Vildor will survive for a month on that boundary if injuries arise yet again like they did a season ago? Penalties are a big issue. Right down the stretch, he was much better about it, but even throughout the rest of his NFL career, Carlton Davis has committed a lot of penalties. He is a grabby player. He's physical. He'll get called for pass interference. He'll get called for holding. He'll get called for illegal touching, and that happens, right? That's something you're just going to have to live with when it comes to really the entire Lions secondary, but Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold in particular. And I think Aaron Glenn and really Tom Brady said it best where, yeah, you're going to get called for a PI a game. You're going to get called for a couple of penalties and automatic first downs. But at the end of the day, the referees aren't going to call it all night. At the end of the day, the referees are going to have to let you play eventually. And that's the kind of style of football the Lions were playing. Yeah, they got called for pass interference. Yeah, they got called for penalties. But at the end of the day, they were a top 5 secondary in both takeaways and touchdowns allowed. And like Brady said, the referees only call it a couple times a game. They're only going to call it maximum 5 times a game. And after that, you're allowed to play physical. After that, you're allowed to hit wide receivers early. You're allowed to be in their chest. You're allowed to be in their face. And that is where Carlton Davis thrives. The contract will be big and cap space will get tight. The production, I think, is good, but not necessarily elite. I think Carlton Davis is probably a top 20 cornerback in the NFL, and you'll have to pay him top 10 money. So from a contractual perspective, the production doesn't really match it. The cap space is going to get tight. And unfortunately, obviously not due to any fault of his own, Carlton Davis is just at a bad age for cornerbacks. He's going to be 29 next year, right? If you sign him to a 3-year deal, you're going to get ages 29, 30, and 31, which is typically where cornerbacks begin to fall off, especially one who's had so many injuries throughout his career. there's a chance that Carlton Davis falls off. There's a chance that he isn't the same cornerback and that he can't be the same cornerback going forward just because of his age and, getting older, right? Getting a little more frail, getting a little weaker as time goes on. And it's not that cornerbacks can't succeed at 30, right? Darius Slay is doing it right now at a super high level and about to start in the Super Bowl. And there are lots of other cornerbacks. Jalen Ramsey is 30 years old, 30 plus, and plays very similarly to Carlton Davis from the press man, physical, right? Get in your face cornerback. So it absolutely can be done, but there is an inherent risk at signing a 29, 30-year-old cornerback to be the face of your secondary and to be a guy that you rely on so heavily. Now, as far as contracts go, I do think that a 3-year contract for $55 million, about $18 million a year, put him through 2027 would be kind of the right option, right? I think that is a good contract. It's not going to break the bank for the Detroit Lions, but it'll bring back their cornerback one. They'll have some cap space to move around with and some cap space to work with, but they will also have to, restrict some cap a little bit. But with Aiden Hutchinson still on his rookie deal, JMO still on his rookie deal, Kirby still on his rookie deal, Branch, Laporta, Gibbs, Campbell, Mahogany, all of those players on their rookie contract still, they can afford to pay Carlton Davis for the next few years. They can afford to push some money back when they have over $100+ million in cap space for 2027. There is wiggle room. There is the ability to get it done. And quite frankly, I think if you don't get this deal done, you're not upgrading at cornerback. If anything, you're regressing at the cornerback position, and that's not good, right? The free agency market for the cornerbacks this year isn't really that good. It's Carlton Davis, it's Charvarius Ward, and after that, it's a lot of journeymen. It's a lot of older players. It's a lot of guys that aren't going to be nearly as good as Carlton Davis at what he does or fitting the Detroit Lions system, and yet they'll be relatively expensive. They have the same injury issues or the age issues or the production issues. So at the end of the day, unless you're getting Charvarius Ward, I would go and re-sign Carlton Davis, right? The secondary as of right now is Charvarius Ward, DJ Reed, and then you go to Byron Murphy, which I think is a pretty significant step down. You have Jeff Okudah, which is another significant step down from that. And then after that, it's Rasul Douglas, it's Dante Thomas, it's guys that you don't want as your cornerback one. It's cornerback twos, it's cornerback threes, it's depth guys that you don't really want starting on the boundary outside of injury concerns. So with that being said, knowing that you probably don't want to throw another rookie in the mix, have 3 to 4 guys on years 1 and 2, you don't want that in your secondary. You want at least a veteran presence. I think Carlton Davis is a must sign for the Detroit Lions. Will it make cap space a little tight? Probably. Are you going to overpay him a little bit as a top 10 cornerback for top 20 results? Probably. But by re-signing him, you guarantee that you don't move backwards. You guarantee that your secondary, at the bare minimum, doesn't get worse, and potentially that your secondary could improve and get better. So with that being said, I do think the Lions re-sign Carlton Davis. I think they should re-sign Carlton Davis, and as long as it's not an egregious $25, $30 million a season, I think you can justify it as Brad Holmes, as Dan Campbell, and you give Kelvin Shepard a really good player to work with in his first year at defensive coordinator. So with that being said, that is my opinion. That is kind of where I see the Detroit Lions falling on this particular issue. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on re-signing Carlton Davis, whether it should be done, what the Detroit Lions should do, and all of that. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.